So, what is your favorite TV show about gangs? There are so many to choose from. Sons of Anarchy, Sopranos, my personal favorite, Peaky Blinders. What these shows all have in common is a level of intrigue. They talk about violence, they talk about family ties, and they entertain us. They shock us, they make us cry, they make us laugh. We want to believe that there's a little bit of reality amongst the fiction that we're seeing. So The Wire is often cited as the most realistic TV show ever made about gangs. Set in 80s and 90s Baltimore, but released in 2002. The Wire tells the story about how phones become a main character within gangs, starting with payphones and moving on to these brick kind of burner phones. Drug empires are built and violence is organized and maintained. So it makes sense then, as we move on to our smartphone era, that gangs would too. Wrong. TV shows about gangs have continued to be made, and they continue to follow the same kind of formula. They focus on violence, they focus on family ties, hardships, and intrigue. They come with all the gang stereotypes. They have tattoos, they have chains, they have hoodies and slang and hand signals, but they don't have smartphones. I'm Lyttle Storrod, and I'm here to talk to you about how, in the real world, smartphones and social media are a main character in gangs and victimization. It's been just over a decade since Desmond Patton and colleagues published the first paper on gangs and social media. Their focus was on internet banging, the idea and the phenomenon that young people would say things online, make threats to other people online, and this would become real-world violence. At this time, I was a practitioner in London working with young people involved in youth violence and gangs. And yes, we were seeing young people being harmed and even killed as a result of threats made in YouTube videos. But we were also seeing something else, another form of abuse that was more subtle, that was more difficult to detect, to describe, and to do something about. And you had to put all the pieces together and be able to understand how to really tackle this abuse. And whilst researchers have continued to focus on the deadly trend of internet banging, which is of course important, we must also focus on the other digital harms that young people involved in gangs face. What we know now is that young people involved in gangs, both a decade ago and today, are victims of cyberstalking, cyber harassment, image-based abuse, and technology-facilitated sexual violence and coercive control. Now, I want you to consider that any form of abuse is difficult to talk about. It feels almost impossible to describe to another person. It's tinged with a fear that you may not be believed, that you may be shamed, or you may even get in trouble just for talking about it. So imagine in 2013, a young person who is gang involved trying to explain to an adult who is supposed to be protecting them that they are being abused, and this abuse is coming from a device. It's coming from social media accounts that the adults don't even use, or if they do use, they use Facebook on their computer. This is a time where BBM was the way that people communicated. So still now, young people are faced with these cyber abuses, young people in gangs and young people outside of gangs. And they're still difficult to talk about, difficult to describe. How do you tell an adult that you would rather go and commit some serious violence, stabbing people, harming people, taking part in a sexual act as a victim or a perpetrator, or going and selling drugs miles away from your house, all to prevent a video, a voice note, or an image being circulated of you online? How do you tell someone that you're actually trying to protect yourself by going and taking part in serious youth violence and gangs? This seems like an impossible task. This seems very difficult, and that is because it is. So back then, we called this blackmail. We talked about digital collateral, being blackmailed into taking part in gangs and youth violence to prevent this kind of online harassment. the repeat victimization that comes from having a video out there of yourself in a shameful or difficult position. Repeat victimization. Re-traumatization. This is what the young people were facing. Now, what we would call this coercive control, image-based abuse, sextortion, or even child sexual abuse or child sex trafficking. Notice that I'm saying young people, children. These are people under the age of 18. This is an abuse that affects all genders. So this sounds kind of like a storyline from Euphoria, but that show doesn't have gangs in it. Well, not yet. As one young person explained to me in England, when you're involved in a gang, the stakes are so much higher. They said to me, now my mom could see that nasty shit of me with the guys from last time, and they know where I live. My sister lives there. I don't want the same thing happening to her. So of course I'd rather go and sell drugs or do whatever I've got to do. So why don't these young people just go and get help? Why don't they just tell someone? Why don't they go to a police station? Why don't they run away from it? Well, this is all very difficult to do when you're being cyber-stalked. See, at the start of gang grooming, someone comes along and gives you a brand new shiny iPhone, and it feels great. Someone just gave you something that you maybe cannot afford, that maybe your friends don't have access to yet. And it also gets you in to tell you where all the local parties are going to be and where the older kids are hanging out. But also what that phone comes with is location sharing devices. App 360, Find My iPhone. You become bonded to that phone and bonded to the person that gave you that phone, the person that is then going to exploit you, who is going to send you on these tasks to go and sell drugs, to go and take part in this sexual act, to go and harm someone. And they're going to watch you on GPS tracking whilst you do it. That isn't the only way that cyberstalking happens within the gang world. It's also about video calling. Show me you've got the drugs. Show me who you're with. Show me where you are. Show me the money. These are all ways to check in and make sure that someone is following your orders. So then, how does that young person walk into a police station? How does that young person walk into a hospital if they need medical attention? Because Find My iPhone goes with them. The person that is exploiting them can see them 24/7. Someone has 24/7 access to that child. This is very difficult to escape. It's very difficult to talk about. So from working with practitioners in the US and the UK, there's lots of conversations that we've had around these digital abuses for all young people, not just those involved in gangs. And these are some of the things that the practitioners have told me. They've said, it's not that serious. They're just kids. They don't really know what they're doing. It's all just online stuff. What are we supposed to do about it? What's happening here is a minimization of digital harm. An idea that the kids, they're not clever enough, they're not sophisticated enough to be abused or abused within this way. I've also been told that once they have a phone, that's it. We can't do anything. We've pretty much lost them. Giving them a phone is like giving them a loaded gun. So whether practitioners are minimizing or maximizing the digital harms that are happening within gangs, the result is the same. A level of inaction due to an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. It seems that we accept that young people involved in gangs are harmed within their own homes and harmed out on the street, but within their own devices, not so much. And this is the same that we see in our TV shows. They are also given the analog treatment there. So shows like All American or On My Block, set in today's America, both have storylines about gangs. And whilst the other characters are being cyberbullied or cyberstalked, or videos are going viral of them online which they never knew were taken, the gang members are still hiding weapons and using text messages. We know that that's not the reality. We see in courtrooms across the globe how gang members are being convicted of all sorts of crimes through their social media accounts, although not the type of interpersonal violence that I'm talking to you about today. Abuse is abuse, and this is real. In the words of Spooky, the gang leader from On My Block, as he wipes off a makeup tear from a kid's face who was dressed as a gang member for Halloween, this shit's real. So what do we do about it? What are we supposed to do about it? Well, the first thing we need to do about it is find a way to talk about it. We need to find a voice. We need to help the young people find a voice. It took me over 10 years as a researcher to explain technology-facilitated sexual violence in gangs and have it published, have those words accepted and published. And I'm not a victim. I'm a witness in a position of privilege. So imagine how much more difficult it is for those young people to try and explain this kind of abuse. What we need to make sure we're doing is taking young people seriously when they speak. As researchers, as community members, family members, as parents, we need to listen. We need to understand. We need to hear. And we need to ask questions. As various policies spring up across the world, the Online Harm Act in the UK and Canada, the Kids Online Safety Protection Act in the US, we need to make sure that these policies are inclusive of the experiences that gang members are having. We can only do that if we accept three things. First, young people in gangs can also be victims. Young people in gangs are kids. They deserve support and protection. And kids in gangs have smartphones, but smartphone abstinence is not an option. I've watched as on both sides of the Atlantic, social media bans and phone removal policies have been enacted, and they fail again and again and again. Digital lockdowns set young people up to fail. Why? Well, asking young people who have grown up in a digital world to live without phones and social media is an alien concept. Their phones, like our phones, are places where they go for pro-social contact. Pro-social contact and opportunities is how we reduce gang violence. They need those opportunities. Young people involved in gangs are some of the most marginalized within our communities. Taking away their phones only deepens this marginalization. Like everybody else, young people involved in gangs are receiving their work schedules. They're checking their homework. They're checking in with friends and family across the world. They're buying things. They're doing all the things that we do on our phones through free social media apps that give them access to a multitude of opportunities. What they're also doing is receiving digital reassurance. So some girls who I worked with who were involved in gangs, but also the criminal legal system and had their phones taken away from them, explained to me that their phones gave them an immense sense of emotional support. So they were listening to music, or they were watching videos, they were looking at funny cat images on their camera rolls, all to block out gunshots on the streets, or arguments within their home, or to calm them down from traumatic memories. Their phones were giving them practical support 24/7. They were also able to contact people all the time if they needed to speak to someone. They also use their phones for physical safety. So when they're walking around dangerous neighborhoods, they could call someone for immediate support. Walking and talking makes us all feel a little bit safer. They could also call a rideshare, or they could use things like App 360 in a positive, supportive way to track their friends, to make sure that people are okay and getting to their destinations. And what about those young people who are facing internet banging? Well, when we take away their phones, they're also flying blind. They can't see when the threats are coming, so they can't defend themselves. They also can't defend anyone else that is around them. As a young person said to me, say because we're in the city and someone pulls out a gun and shoots, what if it hits Miss Lorraine, the youth worker? None of us have a phone. What am I supposed to do? Just watch her bleed out because the court took my phone? I feel like we should always be allowed a phone. So a decade later, what do we know about gangs, social media, and smartphones? Well, we know that the TV isn't ready to think about these complexities together. But more importantly, we know that for at least a decade, young people involved in gangs have been victims of various complicated digital harms. In a decade from here, digital practices will have changed. Apps will have changed. We still don't know the impact of live streaming or AI on gangs and victimization. But what we do know is that even when technologies and apps change, that much of the abusive behaviors will remain the same. So when we look back in a decade, what we want to be able to say is that we listened. We tried to understand. We tried to intervene. We did something. We're talking about it. We're still trying. Because it turns out that the wire was right. Phones are a main character within gangs and victimization. Thank you.